Hey there. For this video I have jam-packed an entire build into the one sitting. It's a roughly 1/24 scale Aussie Pub. There's no measurements with this because I eyeball everything. I just make sure the doors and windows are the same size and everything seems to work out that way. So I can't help you if you want to replicate it, but you can always, do the same as I do, have a look at an image and then recreate it that way, or measure it all up from an image and then shrink it down to the right dimensions. Otherwise I can't help, I'm sorry, because my measuring skills are so poor. If I gave you the measurements, it would come out looking like some sort of architectural Picasso. I know it would, because I can't measure to save my life. But that aside, I hope you get something out of this and I really hope you enjoy the video. As you can see, I have already glued the shell together, which is just the walls, with the doors and windows cut out from what I observed from the image that I was using. And I've roughly put a corrugated roof on and glued it all together and sprayed it black. These are just little cardboard bits at the top of the building that make that lovely shape, and I gave them the same treatment. I glued them on, sprayed them black, after I cut them out, of course. And then I got stuck into doing this with this paste. I wanted to stop the look of corrugations completely, so I put this on and I could still see there was corrugations through it. So I mixed paint with it and put it on and I could still see some corrugations through it. So then I got some acrylic paint and put it down, which would sort of waterproof it a little bit, and then I put it down top, and that seemed to make quite a nice smooth finish, which was what I was after. So I spent weeks and weeks figuring this out and getting it right, and this is part of the process, is stopping the look of corrugations by waterproofing the cardboard. I just, on top of the black spray paint, I put a layer of black acrylic. Instead of using the green, I didn't need to use the green, it was just a sample that I was showing. And I covered it entirely, and I did this 2 or 3 times from what I can remember. I really did want to waterproof it, and I mixed paint through the modelling paste because I wanted a yellow building, even though it's not the correct colour. I did want to put down a foundation of a similar colour. And this was just one of the most laborious jobs I've done in my life. I'd have to apply this once a day on one side because it would take hours to dry. And the more I tried to smooth it, the more difficult things got, and I'd sand it and then put more layers, and it was a lot of work. It came out beautiful, but I don't know if I'd recommend doing this, to be honest. It was difficult, but maybe you could come up with a better method than I used, because this was a first time for me. As you can see, the little ridges, I'm sanding them down. And I had to put about 3 layers on this building as I turned it over one wall every day and just got it smoother and making it look quite lovely in the end. It's beautiful, but it was a lot of work. So now this is done, I'm going to put some paint onto it. I want to sort of, make it more of a yellow ochre. So I just put in some of the modelling paste with the paint as well, because I want to still keep thickening it up and having a nice, very flat paint. I don't want any shine. These are those primer paints that you get for, sample pots, and they're very, very flat, almost chalky flat, which is excellent for what I'm doing, because shiny paint throws perspective off and does things to miniature models, which doesn't work. So the flatter the better, I've found. I also just painted these. I didn't use a palette knife to spread it on like I did with the building. I possibly could have done the entire building with a paintbrush, but I likely would have had to do about 10 layers or something like that for the thickness that I was aiming for to get rid of corrugations. And that's the shell all glued and painted and ready to start working on for detailing. I'm going to start out with windows. I made a little jig for windows because I had to make so many. I actually had to make 3 jigs, but I just used long thin strips I cut of balsa wood and just a little plywood jig that I made. I've left the sizes of the windows there, the bits that I cut out, so I can use it down the track for other windows on buildings. If you just put a little bit of baking paper into the bottom of the jig, then you can just lay it in, and the wood glue will not stick to the paper. It won't stick to plastic either, but because it's inside a jig, I just wanted to use baking paper. And as you can see, that's the window sizes there that I've kept. So if I want to make a window down the track, I know to come back to that and say, oh, that's the size I'm going to use for this building, so I'll use this jig. No point in making something you're not going to use again. Also in the corner of each part of the window for the jig, I've just left a little space so I can slide a toothpick in there when the window's dry. And this right here is a prime example of how I measure everything. I literally lay things down one piece at a time and just mark them out, cut them out and put them in. I do this with pretty much everything. I do find it works well for me though. I wasted too much time measuring things and stuffing it up, so just this method is good for me. And you can see that little slot there when it's dry. I can just flip them out. The baking paper will just get them to lift straight off. And yeah, it's very nice, tidy, easy way to make exactly the same size windows. You can see that just me popping them out. You've got to be gentle with balsa wood. It's one of the reasons too I make something like this, because balsa wood is just very prone to breaking. Just by looking at it, it'll just snap. Alright, now they're ready for painting. All 500 of them. I just laid them out onto this little long bit of dowel and gave them a quick spray. Trying to cut corners as I always do. And then I don't know why, but I went and put white on them, which was idiotic. I normally would never do something like this. Normally I would do a brown base. Oops. I'll fix that one later. Normally I do a brown base and then add colour. And I do that for a reason, and you'll see it later on in the build. Yeah, don't go chucking white on unless it's going to be a white window. I wouldn't recommend you do that, because the colour you put on top, that white comes through from underneath and it alters the colour that you want, especially if it's, an older building, or, you want it to look realistic, and I don't know, the colours come out odd, very, very odd. I just use this little bit of balsa wood to put a little strip across the centre to make the, the uppy downy middle bit of the window. I don't know what it's called, but you know what it is. And I'm carefully measuring it again with the knife. Perfect. I've just got a little bit of plastic that I've put onto the window. It's nice and just the right thickness to fit in the hole. But inside the hole too, there's an importance of making sure you darken the inside of window holes. Because see how that yellow is coming through from the inside of the window frame? You'll find if you darken inside it, you can't see it, and it won't ruin the illusion of it being a realistic looking window. So if you can, just take a little bit of time to do that. Now with this plastic that I use, it's just plastic off, a box. You might buy an object in the store, and it's just nice, flat, smooth plastic, but it has to be just the right thickness so it won't bow or look buckled when you use it. Because if you get buckled looking waves in your plastic, it won't look like a sheet of glass in a window. It will break the illusion. So make sure it's just thick enough to not have any bends or waves in it. But also it's got to be thin enough so it will sit behind the window and not make the window jut out and look the wrong scale either. So it's that Goldilocks kind of plastic, but as you can see, it's almost perfectly flat. Works very, very well. It's so thin you can barely see it, which would be roughly around the same thickness of a sheet of glass should be on a window. Look at that. Very, very nice, very tidy, and that's what you want. If you want realistic looking work, you've got to be tidy. Doors, very basic balsa wood, just draw in the pattern and also cut out the holes where you want glass and that sort of thing. Super, super easy stuff. My measuring tool, which is a coffee stirrer. Once again, so I don't have to measure. I put it one side, eyeball it, the other side, eyeball it, on the bottom and the top, so all the same thickness, which gives a really genuinely accurate pattern. And I don't have to measure anything. And then I can match them up by using it on the other one as well to make sure it's the same. That way I know that my work will be even all the way across. I use different size sticks for different things that I do, but I always make myself a tool so I can avoid measuring and have as much accuracy as possible. Again, with a strip of balsa wood, just to go down the centre of the door where the glass will be. And as you can see, I've just coloured the top with a pen. It's like a paint pen, but it comes off like stained glass. And I thought it looked really good. And I just jam that in there, and it looks quite good for a very quick, easy little door. And just the little bit that goes above the door. It's just a coffee stirrer, painted with brown and then green, no white. And a strip of balsa wood. This is about the thickness of a match, but it just goes up the outside of the door and it just tidies it up, makes a nice door frame. For this lovely stuff at the top, I just used more coffee stirrers. I stained them or painted them brown and then sort of an off-white. Did them a little rough, I didn't make them perfect. And me measuring again. It's just, bit of glue, and then use the scissors to cut the piece to size that I just measured and plonk it on there. And this is really, really basic stuff, but doing it one little piece at a time, it's like making a puzzle as you go. And if you make one piece at a time, you're less likely to stuff it up. That's my finding anyway. And as you can see, I just measure it, cut it, plonk it on there, and then it just kind of makes itself. I just love it. I'm going to put some of that sort of trim across the top later on as well. I'm going to do the roof and the balcony, and I measured out the front so I would know how much I wanted in way of width for a footpath and for the balcony. So, as you can see, I'm not measuring, but I'm using the width of the wood that I already had. And then I did these. I eyeballed this. I measured none of it, but it worked. These bits of square dowel. I think it's square dowel. But I used them as the posts. And then I just used matchsticks to eyeball measure as evenly in between as I could. And then I used a ruler. Shocking, I know. But just to double check that it wasn't, completely out of whack. But these turned out really good. And I made the holes by just shoving them down in there. And then I used more texture paste mixed with black acrylic paint to coat the XPS foam, which will eventually look like concrete when I put a grey finish on it. And this is just more very flat grey paint. I'm just sort of doing circular motions just to avoid making brush strokes if possible. This is a very heavy kind of a dry brush, but this XPS foam is, it really takes up a lot of paint, which I like. I like that pitted looking surface. It makes excellent looking concrete. And these balsa wood balcony bits, I just used a ruler again to draw in the boards. Didn't measure them, I just guessed the width. and pressed hard enough for the impressions to look like the right depth of wood. And I have learned over time to stop using stains or watered down paint on balsa wood, because it just warps it. It really takes up the water in the paint. So I just use a bit of spray paint on these and then a dry brush. You just draw in the little boards, maybe little nails if you want, and give it that spray, because it's just nice and dry and won't warp it at all. And just an off-white again, which I ended up changing as well. I don't know why I went and used a light colour again. I don't know what. I think I was really out of practice, and not like riding a bike. I'd forgotten really basic things. So I ended up getting rid of that, making it brown again, and then doing a reddish kind of brown on top of it. Because this looks really aged, but I didn't want it to look dry aged, like it was, on the front of a beach house or something. It just, it looks dry. And you can see now where I've gone and put a reddish brown instead. It's livened it up a bit. That's the colour I used, and it's one of those shiny acrylic paints, but I don't mind, because if it had, a bit of lacquer or something on it, if it was a real, building, it would have a little shine on it. So that's all good. I'm just hyper aware of shiny paint. You've got to be careful with that stuff. It pulls the eye in and looks unnatural and weird. But this looks good. I like it. And now you can see that it's ready to put together, as in lift it up to the second story. And first I'm going to put in all the posts. I sprayed them brown, and then I gave them a coat of hooker's green. It's just a nice colour that I use on a lot of buildings, because it's a heritage colour on buildings in Australia. And I just put them in, and just make sure that everything appears to be lined up nicely. And then I cut a little slot out of each back of the post, so the floor would sit against it and sort of slot into it. I've printed out some decals, some for the outside, some interior, and some to actually make the illusion of the interior of the pub. I spotted these online. It's just a basic, pub printout kind of thing, like a bar or something. But see the lights, the way they look like that, I thought they'd work well as part of an illusion inside. So I glued them round the right way, and on a bit of, just primed up cardboard. And then I glued them down nice and tidy, and got them nice and smooth with a dry brush after I did that. I've put them side by side. I know which probably looks weird, but I'm actually going to bend this into a square. So there will be 4 walls going around the interior. I just get a nice dry brush and smooth them down so there's no lumps, and make sure it'll never come off. And then I've got a nice hardwood floor made out of more printed, there's the hole that I've drilled in the bottom of that just for the lights to come up through. But I've put down some printed out hardwood flooring that I did at my local library. And then I just lay them down to the shape of the floor, as neatly as I can, to try and make sure the pattern is even. And then this is the box. I put a little bit of balsa wood and a bit of dowel across it to make it look like a bar, because there were chairs there and the angle was off. I'll put these lights in and around the box of illusion, I suppose I'll call it, just to make it look like there's light coming down from the ceiling and onto a bar that actually isn't even there. I use the toothpicks to mark out where the floor is going to be, so I know how far to not go outside, so I don't have it sticking on the ground outside the walls of the pub. So then, once again, I'm not measuring. I'm using simple tools to do the measuring for me, or, replace the need to measure My work is certainly not perfect. It can be shonky, but I'm good at disguising the mistakes that I make. And the methods that I use are not accurate, but they're good enough to get away with it. And it saves an awful lot of time, which I like very much. Anyway, got these down, put this on, and as you can see, it's when you look through the windows, it's going to be an illusion. I'll put these pieces across the top. The roof will be resting on those, or the awning will be resting on those, sorry. They were just stained brown and then white. And I used a bit of wood glue on them. Because super glue dries so quick, I make a lot of mistakes with that stuff. But before I glue that down, there it is. I'll turn it on. Got the 3 little switches under there. There's 3 little sets of lights. They're only like $1 a little set of lights. And they just look really beautiful. Really, really nice. You can see through there that the illusion's quite good. A bit of XPS foam for trim around the outside. It's meant to be tiles, but I just used some XPS foam and I just drew a crisscross pattern and then I painted them black, just with some black acrylic paint. Certainly wouldn't spray them because if you use anything oil-based on foam, it will dissolve it. But these are another really nice, easy little bit of detailing. It's starting to come together. It's a little bit at the front. I mean, this wasn't perfect either. I sort of didn't make quite enough pieces. They were left from a scrap of the windows that I was making, so I was able to stretch it out to just enough, but it still looks lovely. And then just the corrugated cardboard with a bit of balsa wood to fortify it so it won't buckle over time or while I'm working with it, because when you peel the cardboard when it's corrugated, it's very flimsy. So just reinforce it with maybe another bit of cardboard, or preferably the balsa wood. I'm going to give that a reddish tint with, I think, I don't know what it's called. It's some sort of reddish brown, which looks nice. Red ochre, we'll call it that. I don't know. But it looks lovely. Before I go gluing the roof down completely, I want to start getting on with the balcony so I can get my hands in there and do what needs to be done. So I've just used wood glue again, just because super glue, sometimes you're going to have problems, and it's just, if you want to, the way I don't measure, I need to slowly position things and adjust it and make sure it's correct, or if it isn't correct, I need to adjust things to align things a little better to make up for mistakes that I've made, if that makes any sense. So I find wood glue, a nice really thick wood glue, so it'll sit there and you can move it around a little if you need to. Works really well. And I'm just putting this across here, and you can see it's starting to really come together. It's not perfect joining, but once it's glued, a little bit of paint in that little join there, you're not going to even notice. Looks good. Now this is the cast iron lace work. I just used lace that I had trouble getting any lace that didn't have a floral kind of pattern to it. This was one. I like it. It almost looks like a fleur-de-lis kind of thing going on with it. But I mean, the fact that it just didn't have flowers, I was kind of grateful. I just used a stiffener on it, and then I'm just going to trim it up with a bit of balsa wood that's once again brown and then painted green. As you can see, it's just nice and tidy. And that lace comes out really nice and stiff when you use the fabric stiffener on it too. And then I can glue the roof down. These little bits around the base of the posts, just a little sliver of cardboard, and I made one as a template. I just used these long strips that I cut so I could make about 9 of them. And there's a little template one, so I knew I wrapped it around and I knew it was the correct length. And then I made the little marks where I'd just cut it on the inside, and then I could wrap each one around. It turned out just to be a nice simple finish. Once again, just really something quick and easy that works well instead of doing each individual little piece going around. This is more lace that I'm going to use for the balcony railing, and it's got some flowers in it, but it's not too bad. And I painted it up white after stiffening it, and I put the green on for the railing, and I don't know, it came out looking like Nana's curtains or something. I think it's overkill with detail, and it sticks out like dog's balls because it's white. So I just went back to the original lace, which is almost like a flesh colour. I stiffened it and then just put a kind of a beigey white railing across the top. So it almost makes it a little more, not invisible, but it's less visible. Instead of being so prominent and, hey, look at me kind of feature, it's far more subtle, and which makes it more realistic, because often less is more, and this is an excellent example of that. Far, far nicer than the Nana's curtains kind of thing going on. It looks nice. It's a little uneven, but looks a hell of a lot better. Just to make this little peak of the front of the roof, the roof, I'll call it the roof. I just used a fancy toothpick on this. It's made of cardboard, balsa wood, and a coffee stirrer, and this toothpick, which I put on upside down. It's just very, very basic, but it works. I put a pin in there so it'll hold the base as it glues and dries, or hold the back of it down as it glues and dries. And I'm going to put trim on the top of the awning roof, eave. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, these are the bits that I also put around, not just to cover up that ugly line where I joined it, but this was actually part of the building, so it was very convenient. But once again, I just laid it down, measured it with a pencil, cut it and glued it on. Same with these, every single piece I made one at a time by holding it against the angle of the roof, using a pencil to mark it, and then cut it and glued it. Just putting this on. This is basically tidying it up because it is a little untidy. But it's starting to really come together. Really, really is. I just used some balsa wood again. And just to make these little decorative pieces that hang above the first floor, I just eyeballed it and ran a pencil down what I thought was about halfway. And then just marked either end, because I was going to use a Dremel tool. I did use a Dremel tool just to drop down a circular pattern, so I didn't have to use a knife, because I started using a knife to cut these, and being balsa wood, it just snaps. So I love balsa, but it's a pain to use. So I did that. So I had the little curve either end and just ran the knife down. So I had the very basic shape that I wanted. I wanted to do fancier stuff than this, but I don't have the tools to use on hardwood, and well, this works anyway. Plus, I would have been there for a month of Sundays trying to do anything fancier than this, I'd say. It's really simple but effective, and I gave it a brown spray and then an off-white, and then just glue them up in there, and they just look really nice. Clean up the glue, because if you leave glue sitting there, it will have a shine to it, and once again, you don't want things to be shiny, because they catch the eye. The only shine you want is on those nice clean windows. I'm going to put some guttering in for not only detail but to tidy up this roof, because me just using the building, flipping it over and painting it and that sort of thing, it weakened this corner. So this nice bit of heavy wood, I'll also use a skewer that's painted to be a downpipe to hold it up. Bit of brown paint to get rid of that yellow paint that ended up on there when I was working on it. Oh. I ran a pencil down these and then a paintbrush handle because I wanted it to look a little bit like a gutter, not just, a slab of wood that's been glued on there, which is a little odd. I mean, it's not exactly, the great illusion of a gutter running there, but it's better than just a chunk of wood being stuck to the back of the building. So that's my reasoning on that. I think it looks a little better. And I'll just put them all the way around. And yeah. I got to tidy all this up as well. Once I get that done, it's just about time to clean up the entire building, touch everything up, and get to staining it, and that is just about it. This little piece, because my gutter wasn't long enough, so it's one of those little sections on a drain pipe. I know I've seen them before, I don't know what they're called. There's my little down pipe made from a skewer. I mean, there's all sorts of ways around stuff to make it look good and realistic and feasible. But this is, very quick, very easy, and it looks good. Oops, super glue made the paint stick to my finger and ripped it off. I'll touch that up later. And this is it done before it's dirtied up a bit. I mean, it looks very nice and tidy like the day it was built kind of thing. But I want to bring out detail, tidy it up as well, make it look a little more, I suppose I could say three-dimensional, even though it's three-dimensional already. But you'll see what I mean. So I'm just going to use the same colours that I applied and this sludgy, and just touch up all the ends where I snipped them with the scissors and that sort of thing. Just makes everything nice and really clean looking. And I've got to touch these windows up. The ones that I had painted white and then green, and I have no idea why I did that. The reason I do paint things brown underneath is because see that white coming out like that? It's just wrong. But if you paint them brown first, you won't have that look. Painting them afterwards, you're at risk of getting it on your glass and all that sort of thing. Tidy all this up with a bit of stain, hide all the gaps. And the same stain again, I'm going to start going around the entire building and just make it grounded and dirty. So the ground is attached to the building and the building is attached to the ground and everything comes together, and the building is attached to the windows and everything is one cohesive piece instead of like free floating pieces that are a part of one big build. And this just helps to really tie everything together. This can be daunting when you first do it, so just use a really watered down stain and play with it, and you keep a very clean brush and clean water with you, and use the brush like a sponge and an eraser. I mean, you put it down, it's too dark, immediately rinse a brush and then go over it again. It'll soak it straight back up. So you don't have to freak out about it too much. And you've got to work fairly quickly, but if you are at the ready with a clean brush, you're not going to have any problems. Just don't apply too much in the first place and you should be all right. This is one of the favourite jobs that I find I do. I don't know, it's just... it makes it look so much more realistic. You're just adding shadow and that sort of thing. Not just grime, but, shadows and you're covering up things you may not want people to see as well, little mistakes. It's when it starts to look really tidy as well. Covering around these windows where there are little gaps and things, and I wouldn't want anyone to be able to see that. So this really helps blur the lines. Just around every little thing. Under there is really important, I think, just to add shadow, if not just a bit of grime. It takes that really stark new look out of it as well, because that white and that yellow together looks extremely clean. And unless it's a dollhouse or something, you probably don't want it to look so clean. You can see the difference where it's been done and where it's not been done. I had to go over it a couple of times too. It kind of disappeared a little after I put the first layer on. But I like it to be a bit grubbier. I'm a little more daring with my work, I suppose. You see it just grounding the front of the building and the door and the posts, and adding shadow to the ground as well. That foam really soaks it up nicely. Plus that paste that's in there is quite absorbent as well. That looks nice. Helps bring out the texture for the concrete while it's at it. It does all sorts of things. And that footpath there, I just drew that with some pencil and a little cream pencil to add a highlight to make it look as though there's more of a little dip in the joins of the concrete. Might seem excessive, the amount going around there, but I don't know, it disappears and then it just darkens so nicely as well. It's beautiful. Really beautiful. I did it on this. I was unsure, but I went at it anyway and was very pleased because it picked up detail in the fabric and it made it look even more like cast iron lacework. All those little dark spots. It really, really helped. And this is it, complete. If you have any questions about things you may want to know on this building you think that I've missed or I have missed, just leave a comment and I'd be happy to tell you how I did it. Say the curtains, I made them just from baking paper. It was so basic I didn't even include it in the video. But yeah, I hope you got something out of this. And I hope that you found enough information in this, because it looks extremely complicated, but it's not as complex as it really looks. It's just trickery and illusion, and it's just a beautiful building. I'm so happy with how it came out, and I'm also very happy with the interior that you'll get to have a look at shortly. But yeah, I hope you got something out of this, and I do hope to see you next time.